In 1987, Guns N' Roses released their landmark debut album, Appetite for Destruction, pissing off parents and critics alike. While the album was released with very little fanfare, hell, it debuted at 182 on the Billboard Top 200 albums, it wouldn't be until the singles Welcome to the Jungle, Paradise City, and Sweet Child of Mine began gaining airplay that the album would skyrocket to the #1 spot. This would prove to be a very important moment for rock music, as the glam/hair metal movement was in full effect at the time. Def Leppard released Hysteria with the hit single Pour Some Sugar on Me. Whitesnake had released their self-titled album with Here I Go Again. Motley Crue released Girls, Girls, Girls with that hit title track, and Kiss was doing something. While the album didn't change things overnight, it definitely changed the perception of glam metal. I mean, once Appetite with Destruction gained popularity with its sleazy hard rock power, and yes, while Axl Rose's style definitely was somewhat influenced by the glam metal style, the rest of the band had a different look, a more sleazy punk, I don't give a f*** look to them. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about how much influence it had on the death of the glam metal style. Guns N' Roses went from faking playing in front of huge audiences to actually playing in front of huge audiences. Appetite for Destruction is as important as it is iconic. For a while, it seemed like this was the direction that rock and roll was going. Nevermind was not the wrecking ball that destroyed the glam metal beast that it's fabled to be, but it was definitely a turning point for rock and roll, and it gave hair metal the mercy kill it finally needed. I personally am in the camp that believes Guns N' Roses paved the way for Nirvana to deal the death blow to hair metal in early 1991 with Nevermind, but by that time Guns N' Roses would go on to release their second and third albums. I mean, if you want, you can go ahead and count GNR Lies, but we're not going to talk about that right now. Nevermind and Use Your Illusion were both debuted within a week of each other, and both projects went on to be a huge success, with both albums being in the Billboard Top 5 and most of the reviews being very positive.
Next, ladies and gentlemen, we have three fine young men from Seattle. Here they are, Nirvana.
During the release of Nevermind, Axl Rose was actually a fan of Nirvana, sporting a Nirvana cap during the music video for the single Don't Cry. He's even wearing it during several segments of the behind-the-scenes video, Don't Cry, making f***ing videos. According to former Nirvana manager Danny Goldberg, during production of Nevermind, Axl Rose apparently heard some of the demos of Nevermind that were floating around, since they were both on the same label, and was really into it. He had apparently also said, quote, something nice about it, and even wore the cap in the aforementioned music video, which apparently left Cobain feeling rather embarrassed than anything else. And by all accounts, Axl Rose was a fan of Nirvana off camera as well, taking Slash to a Nirvana show at some point and telling journalists that he wanted to hear Nirvana play their own rendition of Welcome to the Jungle. Axl Rose was so much a fan of Nirvana that he even made an attempt to meet with them, or at least Kurt Cobain. According to Goldberg, Rose wanted to meet Cobain after a show that took place on October 27th at the Palace Theater in Los Angeles. He had attended with then president of Geffen Records, Ed Rosenblatt. Rosenblatt had told Goldberg that he and Rose were in attendance that night and wanted to know if they could meet Kurt Cobain. So what's Kurt's response to the frontman of one of the biggest rock and roll groups at the time wanting to meet him?
And Eddie said to me, gee, Axl wants to come back and introduce himself to Kurt. And I told Kurt this, and Kurt says, oh God, I don't want to meet Axl Rose. So
from there, Goldberg gave the passes to Rose and Rosenblatt and asked for, quote, 5 minutes for Nirvana to change clothes. And from there, Cobain and Goldberg left out the back door. According to Goldberg, this was his way of not outwardly saying no to Axl Rose, and his way of not pissing off the president of both bands' labels. He speculated that while it was never brought up by Rosenblatt, Axl Rose probably knew what was going on. However, this didn't completely alienate Axl Rose. He once again tried to contact the group to play his birthday party.
Of course, Nirvana's not going to do a birthday party for Axl Rose.
On top of that, during an interview with Seconds magazine during promotion for Nevermind, Cobain referred to Guns N' Roses as the type of band that, quote, has absolutely nothing to say, continuing this idea by stating, whether we're proficient in saying what we want to say doesn't matter. It's just the fact that we're actually trying to communicate something different. something those cock rock bands don't. Goldberg also does a really good job explaining Cobain's distaste for Guns N' Roses during this interview.
And Kurt's whole thing about being a feminist, and again, this was a time when Guns N' Roses had a song that was on one of their big albums that referred to and you couldn't have something more offensive to somebody like Kurt than that. So they were just culturally in different camps at that time.
So it's pretty obvious that Cobain saw Nirvana as the antithesis to bands like Guns N' Roses. Regardless of how similar their beginnings may have been, they were on two different sides of the punk spectrum.
Sunday, Nirvana Sunday. You'll be watching Nirvana videos all day long.
In May of 1992, Lars Ulrich of Metallica and Slash of Guns N' Roses held a press conference to announce that they were going on tour with support from Faith No More. However, this was not the first choice for the tour's opening act. You know where this is going. Despite the low-key rejection the previous year, Axl Rose was very intent on having Nirvana be the tour's opening act. Which, could you imagine living in the alternate reality where that happened? All the bands were at their commercial peak, with all three acts having massive albums released in 1991. Seeing Guns N' Roses in their prime, Metallica before, and Nirvana, I digress. In hindsight, the crowds might have been a little different, but at the same time, I still can't imagine the power that tour might have held. Dave Grohl reflected on this time in an interview with Esquire, stating, "I remember that when Nirvana first came out, Axl Rose was a really big fan of us. Guns N' Roses was about to do this massive stadium tour with Metallica, and they wanted us to open, so Axl had been calling Kurt non-stop. One day we're walking through an airport and Kurt says, 'F***, Axl Rose won't stop calling me!' It was after this rejection, Axl Rose retaliated, telling Metallics magazine that Nirvana would rather sit at home and shoot heroin with their bitch wives than tour with us, and would even go on to make comments about Kurt Cobain and his then pregnant wife Courtney Love on stage.
Problem starts when you start thinking that you're different from everybody else on the fucking planet. Alternative, only thing that means to me is someone like Kurt Cobain in Nirvana, who basically is a fucking junkie with a junkie wife. And if the baby's born deformed, I think they both ought to go to prison. That's my feeling. And he's too good and too cool to bring his rock and roll to you. Because the majority of you, he doesn't like or want to play to or even have you like his music."
To Nirvana, this meant more to them than just a simple rejection. This was them rejecting the idea of becoming another Guns N' Roses type arena rock act. Coincidentally, this tour ended up representing everything Nirvana hated about Guns N' Roses. This tour could be a topic of its own video, but let's just say this tour dealt with issues ranging from onstage vomiting to vocal cord damage to Guns N' Roses making crowds wait hours before they hit the stage, to riots, James Hetfield suffering from third-degree burns to the left side of his body, to Slash dying for 8 minutes after overdosing on a speedball. Maybe Kurt Cobain had some really good foresight. Despite all its hardships, the tour was a massive financial success for both groups. Well, mostly Metallica. According to Slash's autobiography, Guns N' Roses allegedly lost 80% of what they made on that tour. It was really weird seeing Axl Rose in this position, with the goofball featherweight Kurt Cobain, who by all accounts dressed in multiple layers to appear less thin, being on the offense, and Axl Rose, one of the most abrasive figures in rock and roll at the time. I mean, he threatened to fight Vince Neil of Motley Crue outside of Tower Records after the 1989 Video Music Awards.
Anytime he wants it, anywhere, Atlantic City, I don't care.
He's just hurt over some comments made by his label mates, and according to bassist Billy Gold, Axl confronted Faith No More while on tour with them, saying, "I only like you guys, Nirvana, Jane's Addiction, and 2 other bands, and all of you hate me. Why do you hate me? It's like I went away and came back home to find you guys fucked my wife."
Axl, if you're watching this, I want to challenge you to a fight.
The weird thing about this feud to me was that until this point, it's mostly just been a war of words and the artists taking pot shots at each other in interviews and on stage. As long as the artists didn't have a place where they would have to be together, it would just be that, a war of words and nothing else.
Live from Los Angeles, the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards.
The 1992 Video Music Awards were special in a way because it was probably the biggest crossover of grunge, which dominated the preceding year, and glam metal, which had been struggling to maintain relevance since. It's also the first time Axl Rose and Kurt Cobain met face to face. Backstage, Axl Rose and his then girlfriend Stephanie Seymour walked past Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain, and a baby Frances Bean Cobain. Realizing this, Love decided to taunt the couple, specifically Axl Rose, asking him to be the godfather of Cobain and her child, which was all that was needed for him to confront Love and Cobain, telling Cobain, "You better shut your bitch up, or I'm taking you to the pavement." This prompted Cobain to turn to Love and say, "Okay bitch, shut up." Probably in a sarcastic tone to further piss off Rose. Feeling, left out, I guess, Seymour also said something back at Love, asking her if she's a model, to which Love asked if Seymour was a brain surgeon. So if Cobain's sarcastic remark eased the tension, Love's comment towards Rose's girlfriend just made things worse. This feud wasn't just a contained issue between the two frontmen. The night also had the band's bassist, the anti-punk Chris Novoselic, and Duff McKagan also having an exchange backstage, just moments before Nirvana's performance, with Novoselic recalling in an article he wrote in the Seattle Weekly, "I was walking towards the stage and came across my now friend and colleague Duff McKagan. I think Duff was also under the influence. He must have heard something from Rose and had a terse word for me. I was already a little bent out of shape and instantly replied with the same sentiment. The production people grabbed me and we continued towards the stage." This exchange is often dramatized by lots of publications. I don't know if it's just misinformation or if people really just like the idea of Duff McKagan and Chris Novoselic fighting each other, or if they wanted to make this like a whole beef between the bands. I'm not entirely sure. This performance is also notable as Novoselic did his bass toss routine only to be hit in the head this time around. But other than that, the performance went off without a hitch, Nirvana did their Nirvana thing, and the night went on without any more instigate. After the performance, Cobain snuck under the stage. In an attempt to piss off Rose some more, he found a piano and spat all over it. Guns N' Roses were set to close the show with a performance of November Rain with Elton John. According to guitar tech Ernie Bailey, Cobain thought it was fucking hilarious until he saw the performance and realized he spat all over Elton John's piano, much to his horror. MTV's director of music programming, Amy Finnerty, said that while Nirvana was not in their trailer, she had come across Duff McKagan, Gilby Clarke, and quote, other members of Guns N' Roses trying to tip said trailer over. Unbeknownst to the band, an infant Frances Bean Cobain was in the trailer with their nanny. Axl Rose was also present during this stunt, but according to Finnerty, did not have his hands on the trailer. Security was called and the band stopped what they were doing once, they realized a baby was in there. Slash, who I was questioning the extent of his involvement in this feud, actually stated he did not partake in any of the antics that took place that night, addressing the situation and stating, I was like, I don't have time for this shit.
You were young and your heart was an open book.
I'm glad that nobody crossed the line and nobody was intentionally hurt. Both bands kept silent about the situation, as it would look bad on the label's part.
But you can't let a rock star who obviously likes to beat women and likes to control women and who likes to tell women to shut up and who hates niggers and faggots is a racist and a homophobe. He doesn't have the right to speak his mind. Well, he does have the right to speak his mind, but so do we, and he should be shut up.
In a press conference the next day, Nirvana explained their side of the story, while Guns N' Roses actually did remain silent. The rivalry reached its apex the night of the 1992 VMAs, but that didn't stop the pot shots in the press. In the February 1993 edition of The Advocate, when asked by the interviewer if there's anything about Guns N' Roses that he likes, Kurt Cobain responds by saying, I can't think of a damn thing. I can't even waste my time on that band because they're so obviously pathetic and untalented. I used to think that everything in the mainstream pop world was crap, but now that some underground bands have been signed with majors, I take Guns N' Roses as more of an offense. I have to look into it more. They're really talentless people, and they write crap music, and they're the most popular rock band on the earth right now. I can't believe it. He goes on to describe the incident at the VMAs the previous year and compares Axl Rose to the guys he went to high school with, calling him confused, fucked up, and that there's not much hope for people like them. He then recounts an incident that took place during a show when he jokingly said, "And now for our next song, Sweet Child of Mine," and a fan hopped on stage stating, "Hey man, Guns N' Roses plays awesome music and Nirvana plays awesome music. Let's just get along and work this out, man." And I really couldn't help but say, no kid, you're really wrong. Those people are total sexist jerks, and the reason we're playing this show is to fight homophobia in a real small way. The guy is a fucking sexist and a racist and a homophobe, and you can't be on his side and be on our side. I'm sorry that I have to divide this up like this, but it's something you can't ignore. And besides, they can't write good music. And that was the last of the pot shots I could find. Talk about really going all out. Despite all his negative talk of Guns N' Roses, in a twist of fate, Duff McKagan and Kurt Cobain sat next to each other on a flight up to LA in 1994, a few days before Cobain's death. According to McKagan, they talked, but not in depth, stating that they were both dealing with their own demons. When they both arrived in their hometown of Seattle, a thought crossed McKagan's mind. When we arrived in Seattle and went to baggage claim, the thought crossed my mind to invite him over to my house, then and there. I had a real sense that he was lonely and alone that night. I felt the same way. There was a mad rush of people there in public. I was in a big rock band, he was in a big rock band. We were standing next to each other. Lots of people stopped to gawk. I lost my train of thought for a minute, and Kurt said goodbye and left to his waiting car. His new house was right down the street from my new house. I received a call from my manager 2 days later that Kurt had died. He then goes on to apologize to Chris Novoselic for not being rational the night of the 1992 VMAs, with the two performing Sweet Child of Mine in 2015 during a release party for Duff McKagan's self-help book, How to Be a Man, appearing to squash the beef. And once news had got around the industry of Cobain's death, Matt Sorum, Guns N' Roses drummer, was one of the first to call Dave Grohl and offer his condolences.
But honestly, you know what I was just reminded of recently was that after Kurt died, one of the first phone calls I got was from Matt Sorum, who was the drummer of Guns N' Roses. Right. He called and left a message on my machine and just said, "Hey man, I'm really sorry and I hope you're doing well." And I thought that was really cool. You know, they're good dudes, you know. I mean, anyone who's ever met any of those guys, Slash or Duff, they're really nice guys. Yeah, they're absolutely really good guys.
In 2010, Slash and Dave Grohl shared the stage during the Revolver Golden Gods Awards, performing a rendition of Ace of Spades to honor Lemmy Kilmister, who later received a Lifetime Achievement Award. And in 2016, Dave Grohl lent his throne to Axl Rose after he had broken his foot during a show on the Not in This Lifetime tour.
Evict Axl Rose, take possession of his condo, his furniture, his stereo, and his aura.
And that was the entire feud between Guns N' Roses and Nirvana. Despite it being nothing more than pranks and pot shots, I think it led to some insight on how Kurt Cobain perceived mainstream musicians and people who he felt were problematic in the rock community. I actually think it kind of laid the ground to the mentality of the alternative scene now. It's funny how Axl Rose started off as a fan of Nirvana before realizing that Kurt wanted nothing to do with him or his band. And I always saw it as an overblown case of don't meet your idols. While I never felt the need to pick a side, Slash definitely understood the problem Cobain had with Rose. On the Howard Stern show, he stated that there were some issues that happened with Axl that I felt they were totally right about. So, like I said, I don't pick sides, but who won the feud? Some sources say it was Kurt Cobain for never failing to get under Axl Rose's skin. Some say it was Axl Rose for staying quiet while it was sensationalized. But me personally, I think the winner of the beef was David Geffen for making money off both bands regardless of the beef.